Dr. Sarah Chun had always believed that humanity's greatest discoveries came from the most unexpected places. Standing in the humid depths of the Cambodian jungle, surrounded by vines that seemed to breathe with ancient secrets, she never imagined how prophetic that belief would prove to be. The expedition had been searching for 3 weeks now, following fragmentary reports from local villagers about strange structures hidden deep within the unexplored regions of the Cardamom Mountains. Sarah's team consisted of 12 specialists: archaeologists, linguists, xenobiologists, and military escorts from the United Earth Defense Force. What they had found defied every textbook ever written about human history. The temple complex emerged from the jungle like something from another world. Massive stone blocks, each weighing several tons, had been fitted together with impossible precision. No mortar, no gaps, just seamless construction that made modern engineering look primitive. But it was the architecture itself that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. The geometric patterns, the flowing curves that seemed to bend space itself, the way shadows fell in directions that shouldn't have been possible. None of it was human. Preliminary scans are coming back negative for any known human civilization, reported Dr. James Rodriguez, the team's lead archaeologist. His voice carried a mixture of excitement and unease as he consulted his tablet. Carbon dating on the organic matter trapped in the stone suggests this structure is at least 50,000 years old, possibly older. Sarah nodded, running her fingers along one of the massive blocks. The stone was smooth as glass, unmarked by time despite its incredible age. 50,000 years ago, humans were barely using stone tools effectively. There's no way our ancestors built this. The implications hung heavy in the humid air. First contact with alien intelligence had been theoretical for so long that finding proof of their ancient presence on Earth felt surreal. The discovery would rewrite history books, challenge religions, and force humanity to reconsider its place in the universe. As the team moved deeper into the complex, their flashlights revealed more impossibilities. Corridors that seemed to extend beyond what the outer dimensions should allow. Chambers with acoustic properties that turned whispers into symphonies. And everywhere, intricate carvings that hurt to look at directly, as if the eye couldn't quite process the mathematical relationships they represented. It was in the central chamber that they found the statue. The figure stood 12 feet tall, carved from a single piece of black stone that seemed to absorb their flashlight beams rather than reflect them. The being it depicted was clearly not human. Yet there was something hauntingly beautiful about its alien features. 6 limbs arranged in perfect symmetry, a torso that flowed like liquid even in solid stone, and a head crowned with what might have been sensory organs or decorative elements. It was impossible to tell, but it was the face that drew Sarah forward like a magnet. The features were sharp yet elegant, with large eyes that seemed to hold depths of wisdom and sorrow. The mouth was curved in what could have been a smile, though whether it conveyed joy, sadness, or something entirely alien was unclear. Despite its otherworldly nature, there was something undeniably attractive about the figure, a magnetism that spoke to something deep in human psychology. "The preservation is incredible," whispered Dr. Lisa Park, the team's xenobiologist. "Whatever material this is, it's not showing any signs of decay. The surface looks like it was carved yesterday." Sarah approached the statue slowly, her scientific training warring with an inexplicable sense of reverence. The craftsmanship was beyond anything she had ever seen. Every detail was perfect, from the texture that suggested skin beneath the stone to the way the figure's posture conveyed both power and grace. "There's symbols here," called out Dr. Maria Santos from across the chamber. The linguist was examining a series of inscriptions carved into the walls around the statue's base. "This isn't like anything in our databases. The syntax appears mathematical rather than linguistic, but there are emotional undertones embedded in the geometric relationships." As Maria worked to document the symbols, Sarah found herself drawn even closer to the statue. There was something about its presence that made the chamber feel smaller, more intimate. The alien features that should have been disturbing instead seemed familiar, as if she had seen this face in dreams she couldn't quite remember. "Sarah, You should see this, James called from behind the statue. There's some kind of mechanism back here. Looks like it might be part of a larger system. But Sarah wasn't listening. Standing directly in front of the towering figure, she felt a strange compulsion washing over her. The statue's face was level with hers now, thanks to the raised platform it stood upon. Those carved eyes seemed to be looking directly at her, through her, into depths of her soul she hadn't known existed. Later, she would blame the long hours, the stress of the discovery, the intoxicating sense of being the first human to stand in this place for thousands of years. But in that moment, acting on pure instinct, Sarah did something that would change the course of human history forever. She kissed the statue. It was meant to be playful, a moment of connection with the unknown artist who had created such beauty in this hidden place. Her lips touched the cold stone mouth for just an instant, a gesture of appreciation for the incredible craftsmanship before her. The stone was not cold. Sarah jerked back as warmth spread from the point of contact, but it was too late. The statue's mouth had been warm, soft, yielding, nothing like carved rock should be. As she stumbled backward, her heart pounding with shock and fear, she watched in horror as the warmth spread visibly across the figure's face like blood returning to frozen flesh. "Sarah, what did you do?" James's voice came from somewhere far away, distorted by the roaring in her ears. The statue's chest began to rise and fall with slow, deliberate breaths. The sound filled the chamber like distant thunder, each inhalation seeming to draw power from the air itself. The black stone that had absorbed their lights now began to glow with an inner radiance that cast dancing shadows on the walls. But it was the eyes that made Sarah's blood freeze in her veins. Slowly, impossibly, the carved eyelids began to open. The eyes beneath were not stone, not the blank orbs that should have been there. They were alive, intelligent, and filled with an ancient anger that had been sleeping for millennia. The irises were a deep violet that seemed to shift and swirl like galaxies in motion, and they fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her soul feel naked. The being's head turned with grinding slowness, stone joints moving as if they were flesh and sinew. When it spoke, the voice came not from its mouth, but from everywhere at once, resonating through the stone walls and floor, vibrating in Sarah's bones. "Who dares wake the eternal sentinel from his vigil?" The words were not in any human language, yet Sarah understood them perfectly. They bypassed her ears entirely, speaking directly to her consciousness in a way that left her feeling violated and exposed. The being's gaze swept the chamber, taking in the human intruders with obvious displeasure. "Primitives," the voice continued, dripping with contempt. "Your kind barely dreams in the cosmic dark, yet you dare to disturb sacred spaces with your crude presence." Sarah's team had scattered to the edges of the chamber, their weapons drawn, but useless against something that defied every law of physics they knew. The being rose from its pedestal with impossible grace, its 12-foot frame unfolding like a predator awakening from slumber. "I am Kethvar, guardian of the threshold, keeper of the ancient compact," the being announced, its voice growing stronger with each word. "For 50,000 of your years, I have slept, waiting for the appointed time when the barriers between worlds would weaken enough for my masters to return." As Kethvar moved, Sarah noticed that the symbols on the walls were beginning to glow in response to his presence. The mathematical inscriptions pulsed with increasing intensity, and she realized with growing horror that they weren't just decorations. They were some kind of technological system, and it was powering up. "But perhaps," Kethvar continued, his alien gaze returning to Sarah, "the awakening comes at a fortuitous moment. Your species is spread across this world like a plague, multiplying beyond control. My masters will be pleased to find such an abundant harvest awaiting their return." The temperature in the chamber began to drop as energy flowed from the awakening systems into the being before them. Frost formed on the walls as Kethvar drew power from his surroundings, his form becoming more substantial, more real with each passing second. "The one who woke me," he said, extending a six-fingered hand towards Sarah, will have the honor of serving as herald. Through you, I will learn the current state of this world and prepare the way for my master's return." Sarah tried to run, but found her feet rooted to the spot by some invisible force. The alien's power was growing stronger, and she could feel it pressing against her mind like cold fingers searching through her memories. Around the chamber, her teammates were shouting orders and trying to contact their base, but the communications equipment was failing as the ancient technology interfered with their signals. "Fascinating," Kethvar mused as he sifted through Sarah's thoughts. "Your species has achieved crude spaceflight. You have spread to other worlds in this system. This is unexpected. In past cycles, the indigenous populations were barely capable of bronze working when the time came for harvest." The being paused, and Sarah felt his attention focus more intently on specific memories. Her blood ran cold as she realized he was accessing information about Earth's defenses, population centers, military capabilities. Through her mind, he was learning everything he needed to know to prepare for an invasion. "Interesting," Kethvar said, and for the first time there was something like respect in his voice. "Your kind shows remarkable adaptability. You have weaponry that might actually pose a minor inconvenience to my master's forces. This will make the harvest more entertaining." Sarah struggled against the mental intrusion, fighting to protect the information in her mind, but it was like trying to hold back the ocean with her bare hands. The alien's consciousness was vast, ancient, and utterly ruthless. She felt herself being dissected, cataloged, her most precious memories and deepest fears laid bare for his examination. But then something unexpected happened. As Kethvar delved deeper in her mind, Sarah felt something change in his mental touch. The cold, analytical probing faltered for a moment, replaced by something that felt almost like confusion. "What is this?" the being demanded, his voice losing some of its absolute certainty. "These emotional resonances, they are not what I expected from a primitive species." Through their mental link, Sarah felt Kethvar's surprise as he encountered concepts he hadn't anticipated. Love, sacrifice, hope, the willingness to die for ideals rather than mere survival. In her memories of human art, literature, music, and philosophy, he found something that challenged his assumptions about what humanity was capable of. "Your species creates beauty for its own sake," he said, and there was something almost like wonder in his mental voice. "You form bonds that transcend biological necessity. You risk your lives for abstract concepts like justice and freedom. This is unprecedented." The pause gave Sarah's teammates the opening they needed. James had managed to get a partial signal through to their base, and military reinforcements were already being mobilized. More importantly, the brief disruption in Kethvar's concentration allowed the team's xenobiologists to make a crucial observation. "The power source," Lisa shouted from across the chamber. "The symbols are drawing energy from geothermal vents beneath the temple. If we can disrupt the flow." Her words were cut off as Kethvar's attention snapped back to the immediate situation. The ancient being raised one hand, and Lisa was lifted off her feet by invisible force, her body rigid with pain as alien power coursed through her. "Enough," Kethvar snarled. "Your brief defiance is ended. Soon, my masters will return, and your species will take its place as cattle in the cosmic order. But perhaps," he paused, his violet eyes returning to Sarah, "perhaps some few of you show enough potential to serve in more elevated capacities." As he spoke, the chamber filled with a low, thrumming sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth. The temple complex was fully awakening now, systems that had slept for millennia coming online with increasing power. Through the mental link, Sarah caught glimpses of vast machines buried beneath the jungle, communication arrays preparing to send signals across interstellar space, and, most terrifying of all, defensive systems that could incinerate everything within a 100-mile radius. But she also sensed something else, a growing uncertainty in Kethvar's ancient mind. Her people's unexpected complexity had shaken his confidence in assumptions that had gone unchallenged for eons. For the first time in his long existence, The guardian of the threshold was beginning to doubt whether the return of his masters would proceed as smoothly as planned. The playful kiss that had awakened an ancient evil was already beginning to reveal consequences that neither Sarah nor Kethvar could have anticipated. Humanity's greatest test was about to begin, and the outcome would depend on whether the qualities that made them human were enough to overcome technology and malice that predated their entire civilization. As the temple's power reached critical levels and signals began transmitting to distant stars, Sarah realized that her innocent gesture had not only doomed her world, it might also be the key to saving it. In the aliens' growing confusion about human nature, she saw the first crack in what had seemed like inevitable defeat. The ancient compact was awakening, but so was humanity's greatest strength, their unpredictability. The question was whether it would be enough to survive what was coming. The emergency evacuation of the temple complex had taken 18 hours, but Sarah Chun remained trapped in the central chamber with the awakened guardian. Kethvar's mental hold on her had only grown stronger as the ancient systems came fully online, their connection deepening beyond what either of them had anticipated. Outside, the world was mobilizing for war. Every major government had received the emergency transmissions from Dr. Rodriguez's team, and satellite imagery confirmed their worst fears. The jungle around the temple was transforming as buried machinery awakened from its millennial slumber. Massive structures were rising from the earth, their alien geometries defying human engineering principles. Most disturbing of all, energy readings suggested that similar sites were activating across the globe. General Patricia Morrison stood in the command center of Peterson Space Force Base, staring at displays that showed 17 confirmed activation sites on 6 continents. Each location corresponded to archaeological mysteries that had puzzled researchers for decades. Göbekli Tepe, the Nazca Lines, Easter Island, underwater ruins off Japan, sites in Antarctica that had been dismissed as natural formations. All were now broadcasting signals into deep space with technology that made humanity's most advanced systems look like smoke signals. "How long do we have?" she asked Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead scientist coordinating the global response effort. Based on the signal propagation patterns we're detecting, the nearest response would come from approximately 27 light-years away, Elena replied, her voice tight with stress. But that assumes they're limited by light speed, which their technology clearly isn't. Conservative estimate? 6 months. Optimistic? Maybe a year. Morrison nodded grimly. 6 months to prepare for an invasion by beings whose technology could awaken devices that had been dormant since before human civilization began. The odds were not encouraging, but she had been a military officer long enough to know that impossible situations were simply another kind of problem to solve. Meanwhile, in the depths of the Cambodian temple, Sarah was learning that her situation was far more complex than a simple hostage scenario. Kethvar's mental probes had become increasingly sophisticated, but they had also become more collaborative. The ancient being was no longer simply extracting information from her mind. He was engaging in something that resembled conversation. "Your species' approach to conflict is particularly inefficient," Kethvar observed as he sifted through Sarah's memories of human warfare. "You expend enormous resources fighting among yourselves rather than focusing on external threats. When my masters arrive, they will find a divided world that cannot mount effective resistance." "You might be surprised," Sarah replied, speaking the words aloud, even though she knew he could hear her thoughts directly. There was something psychologically important about maintaining her voice, her individual identity, in the face of his overwhelming presence. Humans have a tendency to set aside their differences when facing existential threats. World War II, the climate crisis of the 2040s, the asteroid mitigation project. We're actually pretty good at uniting when it matters. Through their link, she felt his skepticism, but also a flicker of something else. Uncertainty. The more he learned about humanity, the less confident he became in his predictions about their behavior. His masters had conquered dozens of worlds, harvesting civilizations that were predictable, limited by their biology and psychology in ways that made them manageable. Humans were proving to be something different entirely. "Show me more," he commanded, and Sarah felt his consciousness diving deeper into her memories. But this time, instead of focusing on military capabilities or technological achievements, he seemed drawn to something else entirely. The moments of pure human connection that defined her life. He experienced her childhood through her eyes, feeling the unconditional love of parents who sacrificed their own dreams to give their daughter opportunities. He witnessed her first heartbreak and the friends who stayed up all night helping her through it. He saw her choosing a career in archaeology not for wealth or fame, but from genuine wonder about the mysteries of the past. Most confusing of all to his ancient mind, he felt her capacity for forgiveness, even toward him. "You do not hate me," he said, and for the first time, his voice carried genuine puzzlement rather than command. "I have invaded your mind, threatened your world, doomed your species to slavery or death. Yet your emotional resonance toward me contains no malice." Sarah considered his words carefully. It was true. Despite everything he represented, she found herself feeling something closer to pity than hatred. "You've been asleep for 50,000 years, alone, with nothing but duty to keep you company. You wake up to find a world completely different from what you expected, filled with beings you were taught to see as livestock. I can't imagine how isolating that must be." The observation struck something deep in Kethvar's consciousness. Through their link, Sarah caught glimpses of his true history. Not the glorious guardian he presented himself as, but a being who had volunteered for eternal solitude out of loyalty to masters who had never truly valued his sacrifice. He had been ancient even when he entered his long sleep, and the weight of eons alone had carved hollow spaces in his psyche that he had never acknowledged. "Your empathy is a weakness," he said, but the conviction in his voice was wavering. "It will make your species easy to manipulate once the harvest begins." Or, Sarah countered, "it might be exactly what makes us impossible to predict." Above them, the temple complex was revealing more of its secrets to the human forces that had surrounded it. Military engineers worked alongside scientists to understand the technology they were facing, while archaeologists and linguists struggled to decode the symbols that covered every surface. What they were discovering challenged every assumption about the aliens and their intentions. Dr. Rodriguez had been the first to notice the discrepancies. "These carvings aren't celebratory," he explained to General Morrison during their daily briefing. "The more we translate, the clearer it becomes that this isn't a monument to conquest. It's a prison." The revelation had sent shockwaves through the international response team. If the sites weren't communication arrays preparing for an invasion, then what were they? The answer came from Dr. Santos, who had been working around the clock to decode the mathematical language embedded in the temple walls. "It's a containment system," she announced to the assembled experts. "These sites aren't just broadcasting signals to summon an invasion fleet. They're maintaining some kind of barrier, and Kethvar isn't a willing guardian. He's a prisoner who doesn't know he's been imprisoned." The implications were staggering. If the sites were part of a containment system, then their activation might not be preparing for the return of Kethvar's masters. It might be preventing their return. The ancient being who had seemed like humanity's destroyer might actually be their unwitting protector. But understanding the truth and acting on it were two different things entirely. Sarah remained trapped with an increasingly unstable guardian whose mental state was deteriorating as contradictions in his worldview mounted. The being who had awakened with absolute certainty about his purpose was beginning to experience something he had never encountered before: doubt. "The symbols speak of betrayal," Kethvar said during one of their mental conversations. "But that cannot be correct. My masters would not abandon their faithful servant. They would not leave me to guard against my own people's return." Sarah felt his anguish as suppressed memories began to surface. Images of the final days before his imprisonment, when other guardians had tried to warn him about the true nature of their mission. Conversations he had dismissed as heresy, evidence he had ignored out of loyalty, truths he had buried so deeply that 50,000 years of solitude hadn't been able to unearth them. What if they did? Sarah asked gently. What if your masters weren't the benevolent rulers you remember? What if other species resisted them, fought back, maybe even won? The question triggered a cascade of recovered memories that left Kethvar writhing in psychic agony. He saw the truth of his imprisonment, the real reason for the barriers, the fate that had befallen his master's empire while he slept. The beings he had served with fanatical devotion had been tyrants who fell to a coalition of species they had tried to enslave. The Guardians hadn't been honored protectors. They had been expendable assets, left behind to maintain prisons that would keep the universe safe from their master's return. "No," he whispered, his mental voice breaking like a child's. "It cannot be true. They promised to return for me. They promised." But the evidence was overwhelming, written into the very walls that surrounded them. The mathematical language told a clear story of defeat and imprisonment of a guardian system designed to prevent rather than enable the return of an ancient evil. Kethvar had spent 50 millennia as the warden of his own master's prison, and he had never known it. The revelation shattered something fundamental in the ancient being's psyche. Through their link, Sarah felt him fragmenting, his ancient certainties collapsing like supports in an earthquake. The power that had held her captive wavered, and failed as Kethvar struggled to reconcile his new understanding with eons of suppressed doubt. "I was their most loyal servant," he said, and Sarah heard the bewilderment of someone whose entire existence had been built on a lie. "I volunteered for eternal solitude so that they might return safely to reclaim their empire. I endured 50,000 years of isolation, maintaining their barriers, preserving their legacy, and they were never coming back." Sarah felt the moment when something shifted in their connection. Instead of an ancient predator examining prey, she was suddenly linked to a being experiencing the kind of existential crisis that could drive anyone to madness. The guardian who had seemed so powerful, so certain, was revealed as what he truly was, a victim of manipulation who had been abandoned by those he trusted most. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it completely. "I'm sorry they used you. I'm sorry they left you alone for so long. I'm sorry you had to learn the truth this way." Her genuine compassion seemed to anchor something in Kethvar's fragmenting consciousness. Through their link, she felt him grasping for stability, finding it in the simple fact that she cared about his pain despite everything he had threatened to do to her world. "Your species," he said slowly, "they would not abandon their own this way." "Some would," Sarah admitted honestly. "Humans aren't perfect. We've done terrible things to each other throughout our history. But most of us try to be better than that. Most of us believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, even when they make mistakes or choose differently than we would." It was a simple statement, but it carried profound implications for a being who had never experienced unconditional acceptance. Kethvar's masters had valued him only for his usefulness, discarding him when he was no longer needed. Sarah's response to his crisis was fundamentally different. She offered comfort not because he could benefit her, but because he was suffering. The change in Kethvar's mental state had immediate effects throughout the temple complex. The harsh, military efficiency of the awakening systems softened into something more organic, more collaborative. Instead of preparing for conquest, the ancient technology began adapting itself to human needs, providing air circulation, temperature control, even rudimentary food synthesis. Outside, monitoring stations detected the shift immediately. "Power signatures are changing across all sites," reported Dr. Vasquez. "The aggressive patterns we were seeing have shifted to something more protective. It's like the systems are reconfiguring themselves for defense rather than offense." General Morrison studied the readings with growing hope. If the alien systems were truly changing allegiance, it might represent humanity's first real advantage in the coming conflict. But questions remained about how long the change would last and whether it could be sustained. In the depths of the temple, Sarah was discovering that her connection with Kethvar was evolving in ways neither of them had anticipated. What had begun as a one-sided mental invasion was becoming something closer to true communication, a bridge between species that transcended the barriers of biology and culture. "There is something you must understand," Kethvar said, his mental voice steadier now, but tinged with urgency. My awakening has sent signals that cannot be recalled. Other guardians are stirring, and not all of them will experience the same enlightenment that I have found through our connection. Some have been alone longer than I have. Others were more fanatically devoted to our masters. They will not listen to reason. Sarah felt a chill as she understood the implications. How many guardians are there? 17 on this world, Kethvar replied. And they're waking now, one by one, as the network activates. Within days, they will emerge from their prisons, and they will not be as flexible as I have become. The news meant that humanity's brief moment of hope was already ending. Even with Kethvar as an ally, 16 other ancient beings with godlike powers were stirring to life, and they would not be swayed by human compassion or philosophical arguments about dignity and worth. They would wake with the same absolute certainty that had initially driven Kethvar, and they would begin preparing their world for a harvest that their masters would never come to claim. But there is hope, Kethvar continued, and Sarah felt his growing determination. The barriers that have contained my master's essence can be strengthened, made permanent. With the right modifications, the prison network can become impregnable, ensuring that they never threaten any world again. But it will require the cooperation of all 17 sites, and that means... It means converting or stopping 16 other guardians, Sarah finished, understanding the magnitude of the task ahead. Yes, Kethvar agreed, and I cannot do it alone. The others will not trust me once they discover that I have been changed by contact with your species. They will see me as corrupted, compromised. But if your people can reach them, if they can establish the same kind of connection that exists between us, it was an almost impossible proposition. 16 beings with the power of gods, each one convinced of humanity's inferiority, each one programmed by eons of indoctrination to see any deviation from their master's will as betrayal. The chances of success were infinitesimally small, but they were better than the alternative of facing an invasion by entities that viewed humans as cattle. As if responding to their conversation, alerts began sounding throughout the human monitoring stations. Across the globe, the other ancient sites were showing signs of increasing activity. In Turkey, massive stone blocks were shifting at Göbekli Tepe. On Easter Island, the Moai statues were beginning to move for the first time in 1,000 years. Deep beneath the ice of Antarctica, something vast was stirring to life. The second phase of humanity's greatest challenge was about to begin, and this time they would not have the advantage of surprise or ignorance. The other guardians would wake with full knowledge of what had happened in Cambodia, and they would be prepared for human interference. But they would not be prepared for what Sarah and Kethvar had become, the first successful bridge between species that had been enemies for 50,000 years. In their unlikely partnership lay humanity's only hope for survival, and perhaps something even greater. The chance to transform an ancient prison into the foundation for a new kind of peace. 3 weeks had passed since Kethvar's awakening, and the world had become a very different place. 16 other ancient sites were now fully active, their guardians emerging from millennial slumber with varying degrees of hostility toward the human population surrounding them. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and humanity was running out of time to implement their desperate strategy. Sarah Chun stood in the hastily constructed command center built into the Cambodian temple complex, watching real-time feeds from around the globe. The screen showed scenes that ranged from tense standoffs to outright warfare. In Turkey, Guardian Thexmore had erected energy barriers around Göbekli Tepe, preventing any human approach while he systematically cataloged Earth's military capabilities through captured satellites. On Easter Island, Guardian Velthara had begun converting the surrounding ocean into some kind of crystalline matrix that was slowly spreading toward populated areas. Most concerning of all was the situation in Antarctica, where Guardian Zalkeeper had awakened beneath the ice and was doing something that made no sense to human observers. Instead of emerging to challenge the research teams on the surface, he appeared to be building something massive deep within the ice sheet, something that was generating enough heat to create continent-sized changes in the local climate. The Antarctic situation is accelerating beyond our projections, reported Dr. Elena Vasquez, her exhaustion evident after weeks of coordinated crisis management. Whatever Zalkeeper is constructing, it's reaching critical mass. Our climate model suggests that if the process continues, we could see global sea level changes within months rather than decades. Sarah nodded, her attention divided between the reports and her ongoing mental connection with Kethvar. The ancient being had proven to be both humanity's greatest ally and their most challenging collaborator. His knowledge was vast and his power immense, but his psychology remained fundamentally alien despite their growing bond. Zalkeeper was always the most dedicated of us, Kethvar observed, his mental voice carrying overtones of concern that Sarah had learned to recognize. If he has chosen to construct a convergence engine, it means he believes the return of our masters is imminent. He is preparing to transform your world into something more suitable for their needs. The phrase convergence engine was one that Sarah had hoped never to hear. Through their connection, she had learned about the technology that Kethvar's masters used to reshape worlds for their own purposes. The process involved converting the planet's core energy into a form that could support their unique biology, but the side effects included atmospheric changes that would make the world uninhabitable for most native life forms. "How long do we have?" she asked, though she suspected she didn't want to hear the answer. "If Zalkeeper follows standard protocols, the engine will reach activation threshold in approximately 14 of your days," Kethvar replied. "Once activated, the conversion process will be irreversible. Your world will become suitable for my master's return, but at the cost of everything currently living on its surface." 14 days. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to process the magnitude of what they were facing. Humanity had managed to establish contact with 3 other Guardians through teams similar to her own, but the results had been mixed at best. Guardian Prextal in Peru had shown some willingness to listen to human arguments, but remained unconvinced. Guardian Morthek, beneath the Mediterranean, had simply sealed himself away and refused all communication. Guardian Hexera on Easter Island had been actively hostile, treating human contact teams as an infestation to be eliminated. The strategy of building bridges between species was proving more difficult than anyone had imagined. "There is another option," Kethvar said, and Sarah felt his reluctance to voice what they were both thinking. "If we cannot convince the other Guardians to abandon their mission, we may be able to force them to do so." The suggestion carried implications that made Sarah's stomach twist. Kethvar was proposing that they turn the Guardian network against itself, using his knowledge of the ancient systems to override his fellow prisoners. It would mean war between beings whose conflicts could reshape continents, and humanity would be caught in the middle. "You would fight your own people to protect us?" Sarah asked. "They are not my people," Kethvar replied with surprising intensity. "We serve the same masters, but we were never truly united. Each Guardian was isolated, indoctrinated separately, kept ignorant of the other's existence, except when cooperation was absolutely necessary. It was one of many control mechanisms our masters used to ensure our loyalty." Through their link, Sarah felt the depth of his isolation more clearly than ever before. The Guardians were not a civilization or a species in any meaningful sense. They were individual survivors of a world that had been consumed by their master's expansion, each one converted into a weapon and pointed at future targets. Kethvar's willingness to protect humanity wasn't a betrayal of his own kind, because he had never truly had a people to betray. "The question," he continued, "is whether your species can stomach what victory would require. The Guardians must be stopped, but they cannot simply be destroyed. If we kill them, the safety protocols in our programming will activate, and the barriers containing our masters will fail automatically. We will be trading immediate survival for certain doom." It was another impossible equation in a situation full of them. Humanity needed to defeat beings with godlike powers without actually destroying them, all while preventing the activation of a planetary conversion engine that would sterilize the biosphere. The margin for error was essentially zero, and they were running out of time to find a solution. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. James Rodriguez, who had been studying the psychological profiles that Sarah's team had developed for each of the awakened guardians. Despite the aliens' vast technological superiority, they shared certain cognitive patterns that suggested a potential vulnerability. They're all suffering from some form of what we might call institutional trauma, James explained during an emergency briefing. 50,000 years of solitary confinement, combined with programmed loyalty to masters who abandoned them. It's created psychological fractures in every guardian we've encountered. Even the hostile ones show signs of underlying doubt and confusion. Sarah saw where he was going with the analysis. You think we can use their trauma against them? Not against them, James corrected. For them. These beings have never experienced genuine care or support from anyone. Sarah's connection with Kethvar succeeded because she offered him something he had never had: unconditional acceptance and emotional support. If we can replicate that with the other guardians, the idea was both brilliant and terrifying. It meant sending human contact teams to approach beings who could annihilate them with a thought, armed with nothing but empathy and the hope that 50,000 years of loneliness had left the guardians vulnerable to genuine human compassion. General Morrison's response was predictably skeptical. You're asking me to send people to hug cosmic horror monsters and hope they don't get vaporized. We're asking you to send people to offer friendship to beings who have been alone longer than human civilization has existed, Sarah corrected. If it works, we save the world. If it doesn't, we were going to lose anyway. The general stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. God help us all, but you're right. We don't have any better options. The mission planning took 2 days that humanity could barely afford to spare. Teams were assembled for each of the remaining Guardian sites, composed of psychologists, diplomats, linguists, and volunteers who understood that they might not survive the attempt. Sarah would remain with Kethvar to coordinate the efforts and provide guidance based on her unique experience. The first attempt was made at Göbekli Tepe, where Guardian Thexmore had been relatively passive compared to some of his counterparts. The team was led by Dr. Amara Hassan, a psychologist who specialized in trauma therapy and had volunteered despite having 3 young children at home. The approach was carefully coordinated through Kethvar, who used his connection to the Guardian Network to request a meeting on behalf of the humans. Thexmore's response was predictably hostile. He saw no reason to waste time speaking with primitives who would soon be extinct anyway, but he agreed to allow 1 human to approach close enough for conversation. Dr. Hassan walked across the ancient stone circles with nothing but her training and her determination to protect humanity. When she came within speaking distance of the 12-foot alien being, she did something that no Guardian had experienced in eons. She sat down, made herself comfortable, and asked him how he was feeling. The question appeared to break something in Thexmore's consciousness. Through the Guardian Network, Kethvar relayed the other being's confusion to Sarah. He does not understand the query. In all his existence, no one has ever inquired about his emotional state. What followed was 3 hours of the most important conversation in human history. Dr. Hassan didn't try to argue with Thexmore about his mission or appeal to his mercy for humanity. Instead, she listened as he described 50,000 years of solitude, the weight of duty that had sustained him, and the growing doubts that he had never dared voice even to himself. When Thexmore finally admitted that he was tired, so incredibly tired of being alone with only his programming for company, Dr. Hassan did something that changed everything. She stood up, walked over to the towering alien figure, and offered him a hug. The gesture was absurd on every level. A 5-foot human offering physical comfort to a 12-foot cosmic horror who could have destroyed her without effort. But Thexmore, after a moment of complete bewilderment, bent down and allowed her to embrace him. Through the Guardian Network, every other awakened being felt the moment when Thexmore experienced genuine physical affection for the first time in his existence. The emotional resonance was so powerful that several Guardians actually staggered under the impact, their own buried need for connection suddenly awakening. It is working, Kethvar told Sarah, his mental voice filled with wonder. The network is carrying the emotional patterns to all of us. They are remembering what it feels like to be cared for. But not all of the Guardians were ready to accept such revolutionary concepts. Guardian Velthara on Easter Island rejected the approaching human team with violent force, creating energy barriers that killed 2 volunteers instantly. Guardian Zalkeeper in Antarctica ignored all attempts at communication, continuing his work on the convergence engine with single-minded determination. Most concerning of all was Guardian Nextvorth, who had awakened beneath the Nazca Plains and immediately begun converting the local landscape into some kind of organic computing matrix. Unlike the others, Nextvorth showed no signs of psychological trauma or doubt. His programming appeared to be intact and functioning exactly as intended. Nextvorth was modified differently from the rest of us, Kethvar explained when Sarah asked about the anomaly. He was our master's final experiment, a guardian whose loyalty was not maintained through psychological conditioning, but through direct neural integration. He cannot doubt his purpose because doubt has been removed from his consciousness. The revelation was devastating. If Nextvorth could not be turned, he would eventually rally the other Guardians who remained loyal to their original programming. Even if humanity succeeded in converting a majority of the Guardians, it might not be enough to prevent the activation of the containment system's fail-safes. There is a way, Kethvar said reluctantly, but it would require a sacrifice that your species may not be willing to make. Sarah felt dread building in her stomach as she sensed what he was about to propose. What kind of sacrifice? The neural integration that makes Nextvorth immune to doubt also makes him vulnerable to direct consciousness transfer, Kethvar explained. If a sufficiently compatible mind were to interface directly with his neural matrix, it could overwrite his programming. But the process would require perfect mental synchronization, and the human consciousness would not survive the transfer intact. It was a suicide mission, plain and simple. Someone would have to allow their mind to be completely integrated with an alien consciousness, accepting certain death in order to save their species. The volunteer would cease to exist as an individual, becoming part of Nextvorth's mental architecture in order to change his fundamental nature. I'll do it, Sarah said immediately. No, Kethvar replied with surprising firmness. Your connection to me makes you incompatible with his neural matrix. The attempt would fail and result in your death for nothing. Then who? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. Dr. Hassan has achieved the deepest connection with a guardian other than yourself, Kethvar said. Her successful integration with Thexmore's emotional patterns has created the neural pathways necessary for a full consciousness transfer. She is the only human with a realistic chance of survival long enough to complete the override. Sarah closed her eyes, imagining having to ask the woman who had saved Thexmore to sacrifice her own life to save Nextvorth. Dr. Hassan had 3 children who would grow up without their mother if she accepted the mission. She had a husband who loved her, a career that fulfilled her, a life that mattered to everyone who knew her. But she was also humanity's last, best hope for preventing the activation of a convergence engine that would kill every living thing on Earth. The choice, when it came, was not really a choice at all. Dr. Hassan listened to the explanation with the same calm professionalism she had shown when approaching Thexmore. When the options were laid out clearly, her life against the survival of the species, her response was immediate and unwavering. When do we begin? She asked. The preparations took 2 days, during which Dr. Hassan said goodbye to her family and prepared herself mentally for what was to come. The process would be carried out at the Nazca site, with Thexmore providing the technical interface and Kethvar monitoring from Cambodia to ensure that the consciousness transfer proceeded correctly. As Sarah watched Dr. Hassan's final video message to her children, she found herself wondering if humanity deserved the sacrifice being made on their behalf. Then she thought about the 1,000 small acts of kindness she witnessed every day, the capacity for growth and change that had allowed her to reach Kethvar, and the simple fact that Dr. Hassan had volunteered without hesitation when her world needed her. Perhaps that was what made humans special. Not their technology or their military might, but their willingness to give everything for each other. It was a quality that had impressed even ancient beings who had seen entire civilizations rise and fall, and it might just be enough to save them all. The mission to convert Nextvorth would begin at dawn, and, with it, humanity's final gamble for survival. The dawn sky over the Nazca Plains was painted in shades of crimson that seemed appropriate for what was about to unfold. Dr. Amara Hassan stood at the edge of the massive geometric patterns that had puzzled archaeologists for centuries, now revealed as the surface manifestation of Guardian Nextvorth's awakening chamber. The ancient lines were glowing with alien energy, pulsing in rhythm with something vast and incomprehensible buried deep beneath the desert floor. Sarah Chun watched through satellite feeds from her command center in Cambodia, her connection with Kethvar allowing her to feel the tension that permeated the entire Guardian network. 11 of the 17 Guardians had now been successfully contacted and converted, their ancient loyalty replaced by something unprecedented in their existence: genuine care for the species they had been programmed to destroy. But Nextvorth remained unchanged, his consciousness locked behind modifications that had been designed to prevent exactly this kind of transformation. The neural pathways are more complex than we initially observed, Thexmore reported through the Guardian communication network. The massive being stood next to Dr. Hassan like a cosmic sentinel, his own recent conversion allowing him to serve as the bridge between human and alien consciousness. The integration process has multiple fail-safes designed to prevent external interference. Kethvar's response carried overtones of growing concern. Nextvorth was their masterwork, the perfect guardian who could never question, never doubt, never be turned from his purpose. If this attempt fails, we may not get another opportunity. The stakes could not have been higher. Guardian Zalkeeper in Antarctica had accelerated his construction of the convergence engine, apparently sensing that the other Guardians were being systematically converted. The massive machinery he was building beneath the ice was now generating enough heat to cause visible changes in global weather patterns. If Dr. Hassan's sacrifice didn't succeed in turning Nextvorth, humanity would have less than a week before the planetary conversion process became irreversible. I understand the risks, Dr. Hassan said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the communication equipment despite the alien energies surrounding her. But I also understand what happens if we don't try. My children deserve a chance to grow up on a world that isn't being converted into an alien paradise. The process began with Thexmore extending his consciousness toward the buried Guardian, probing the edges of Nextvorth's neural matrix for potential access points. What he found was troubling. The ancient being's mind was not just protected by programming, but actively hostile to outside contact. The modifications made by their masters had turned Nextvorth into a kind of mental virus, designed to corrupt and destroy any consciousness that attempted to interface with his. He is fighting the connection, Thexmore reported, his massive form beginning to show signs of strain. His neural defenses are adapting to my approach, creating new barriers faster than I can overcome them. It was at this moment that Dr. Hassan made a decision that would be remembered as one of the most courageous acts in human history. Instead of allowing Thexmore to establish the connection gradually and safely, she stepped forward and placed her hands directly on the alien being's massive frame. "Do it now," she commanded, before he can adapt to human neural patterns. The connection was instantaneous and overwhelming. Through the Guardian network, every converted being felt the moment when Dr. Hassan's consciousness was pulled into direct contact with Nextvorth's alien mind. The experience was like watching someone dive into a pool of liquid fire, beautiful, terrifying, and almost certainly fatal. Dr. Hassan found herself in a mental landscape unlike anything she had ever imagined. Nextvorth's consciousness was a perfect crystalline structure, geometrically precise and utterly without flaw. There were no emotions, no doubts, no unnecessary complexities, just pure, focused purpose directed toward a single goal: preparing the world for his master's return. But as she moved deeper into the alien mind, Dr. Hassan began to understand something that even Kethvar hadn't realized. The modifications that made Nextvorth immune to doubt hadn't removed his capacity for growth. They had simply redirected it. For 50,000 years, his consciousness had been evolving, becoming more sophisticated and complex, but always within the parameters of his original programming. He's not just a programmed automaton, she reported through the neural link, her voice already beginning to show the strain of maintaining her individual identity against the pressure of alien thought patterns. He's a being who has become absolutely perfect at serving a purpose he's never been allowed to question. The revelation was crucial. If Nextworth could learn and grow, then he could potentially be taught new purposes, new goals that would redirect his perfected loyalty towards something other than his master's return. But the process would require Dr. Hassan to maintain her consciousness long enough to teach him concepts that had no equivalent in his mental architecture. Love, compassion, the value of life for its own sake rather than as a resource to be harvested. The teaching began with Dr. Hassan's memories of her children. She shared the moment of their births, the overwhelming surge of protective love that had redefined her entire existence. She showed him their first steps, their first words, the countless small moments that made them infinitely precious to her despite their lack of any cosmic significance. Nextworth's reaction was initially one of complete incomprehension. In his perfect mind, the memories seemed like elaborate delusions, emotional responses that served no rational purpose. But as Dr. Hassan continued to share her experiences, something began to change in the crystalline structure of his consciousness. He is curious, Fexmore reported with amazement. The concept of love is foreign to him, but he's trying to understand it. His neural matrix is actually adapting to accommodate new categories of experience. The process was taking a terrible toll on Dr. Hassan. Maintaining her individual consciousness within Nextworth's mind was like trying to hold onto her identity while being dissolved in acid. She could feel her memories beginning to fragment, her sense of self becoming diffused throughout the alien neural matrix. But she persevered, sharing more and more of what made humans special. She showed Nextworth acts of selfless sacrifice, people who gave their lives for strangers they would never meet. She shared moments of artistic creation, the human drive to make beauty for its own sake. She revealed the depths of human friendship, the bonds that connected people across differences of race, culture, and ideology. Most importantly, she shared her own decision to sacrifice herself for her species, not because she was programmed to do so, but because she chose to value their survival above her own. The moment of transformation was like a supernova in the neural space they shared. Nextworth's perfect crystalline structure suddenly developed flaws, beautiful, chaotic imperfections that allowed for growth, change, and, most importantly, choice. The ancient guardian experienced his first moment of genuine doubt about his mission, followed immediately by his first moment of genuine care for the beings he had been preparing to destroy. "I understand," Nextworth said, his voice carrying through the guardian network with tones of wonder and confusion. "These creatures, they are not resources to be harvested. They are valuable in themselves." The conversion was successful, but the cost was devastating. Dr. Hassan's consciousness had been so thoroughly integrated with Nextworth's neural matrix that she could no longer exist as a separate entity. Her memories, her personality, her capacity for love and sacrifice had become part of the alien guardian's mental architecture. But Dr. Hassan herself was gone. "She lives on in me," Nextworth said when the integration was complete, his voice now carrying subtle harmonics that reminded everyone of the woman who had saved him. "Her children, I feel her love for them. Her husband, I understand her devotion to him. Her species, I will protect them as she would have." With Nextworth's conversion, 12 of the 17 Guardians were now aligned with humanity's survival. But the remaining 5, led by Zal Keeper, were accelerating their preparations in response to their fellows' betrayal. The convergence engine in Antarctica was approaching critical mass, and the hostile Guardians were beginning to coordinate their efforts in ways that suggested they were preparing for civil war. The final phase of humanity's struggle for survival would not be fought between species, but between different visions of what the ancient Guardian network should become. On one side stood those who had discovered the capacity for growth, change, and love. On the other stood those who remained locked in patterns of thought that were older than human civilization. Sarah felt the weight of what was coming through her connection with Kethvar. The converted guardians were powerful, but they were not prepared for warfare against their own kind. The hostile guardians, by contrast, had been designed for conflict and had spent 50,000 years maintaining systems that could reshape worlds. "There is one final option," Kethvar said, his mental voice heavy with reluctance. The Guardian Network was designed with a master override, a command sequence that could shut down all systems simultaneously. It was meant to be used by our masters in case we ever became a threat to them. Sarah understood the implications immediately. "You're talking about shutting down the entire containment system. But wouldn't that release your masters?" "Not immediately," Kethvar replied. "The barriers would fail gradually over several years, giving us time to find another solution. But, yes, eventually it would free them from their prison. We would be trading certain death now for possible death later." It was another impossible choice in a situation full of them. Use the override to stop the convergence engine and save humanity, but potentially doom the entire galaxy to the return of cosmic tyrants. Allow the hostile guardians to proceed with their plans, and watch Earth be converted into an alien paradise built on the graves of every living creature on the planet. The decision was made by consensus among the converted guardians, but it was Nextvorth who spoke the words that sealed humanity's fate. "Dr. Hassan died to give us the chance to choose our own path. We will not dishonor her sacrifice by choosing the certainty of extinction over the possibility of hope." The override sequence was initiated simultaneously from all 12 converted Guardian sites. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every ancient system on Earth began shutting down in cascade failure, their power signatures dimming as millennial machinery finally went silent. The convergence engine in Antarctica ground to a halt just hours before reaching critical activation threshold, its alien energies dissipating harmlessly into the polar atmosphere. Zalkeeper's final transmission through the Guardian Network carried tones of absolute fury and despair. "You have doomed the universe to chaos. When our masters return, they will remember this betrayal, and their vengeance will be eternal." But even as the hostile Guardian raged against their decision, Sarah detected something else in his mental voice, a flicker of the same doubt that had ultimately led to the other conversions. The certainty that had sustained him for 50,000 years was beginning to crack, and she realized that the war for the Guardian souls was not truly over. In the years that followed, humanity began the complex process of learning to coexist with their former enemies turned protectors. The converted Guardians shared their knowledge freely, accelerating human technological development by thousands of years. Space travel became routine, contact with other species was established, and Earth became the center of a growing alliance dedicated to preparing for the eventual return of the ancient masters. Dr. Hassan was remembered as the woman who taught the universe the meaning of love, her sacrifice becoming the foundation myth of a new era in galactic civilization. Her children grew up in a world where humanity was no longer alone, where ancient beings who had once seen them as cattle now served as guardians and teachers. And in the deep places of the Earth, where the Guardian Network had once hummed with alien power, new systems began to grow. Not machines of conquest or control, but something unprecedented in the galaxy's history. Technology built on principles of cooperation, growth, and the radical idea that every consciousness, no matter how alien, was worthy of respect and care. The playful kiss that had awakened an ancient evil had ultimately become something far greater. The first gesture in a love story between species that would reshape the galaxy itself. When the masters finally returned from their cosmic prison, they would find a universe that was no longer waiting for them in fear, but standing ready to offer them the same choice that had been offered to their servants. Join a community built on mutual respect and shared growth, or face the united opposition of species that had learned to value each other's differences as strengths. The age of cosmic tyranny was ending, replaced by something that the ancient masters had never imagined possible. An age of cosmic compassion, where the greatest power was not the ability to destroy, but the willingness to understand and protect those who were different from yourself. Sarah Chun, now elderly but still connected to Kefvar through bonds that had grown stronger with each passing year, sometimes reflected on how much the universe had changed because of a moment's impulse to show affection to a work of art. The statue that had seemed so beautiful and tragic in the depths of a Cambodian temple had indeed opened its eyes, but what it had seen there had transformed both the watcher and the watched in ways that neither species could have imagined. The kiss that was meant to be playful had become the most important gesture in galactic history, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of love could have consequences that echoed across the stars.